200. This means that everything is okay, and now I'm going to send the web page to you. This is when we are receiving this return code, the return code of 200. This means that some things as simple as okay, return in the header. This means that okay, I am going to send you the web page that you want. But also we have another for example code. For example, maybe you saw before the code of 404, and this is a famous code. And when you are receiving HTTP 404 code, this means that we don't find your web page, and this means that not found error. And when you are receiving this return code, this means that I can't send you the web page. This web page, this site is not available in this web server. Okay, this is two of the codes that we have on the HTTP. 200 means okay, 404 means not found. Okay, don't forget the detail of the protocols. Internal function of the protocols is not important for us. Because of that, it's not important to remembering all of these details, but it's a good idea to know about some of the information or some of the actions in each protocol. Because of that, let me to say that this is easier, that we can say that when we are sending the HTTP header to the for example to web server, we are receiving another HTTP header. This is another HTTP with the code, and in this code we have information about the web page. For example, 200 means okay. Let me to use it here. This is the HTTP header. After the HTTP header, we will have the actual data, the content of the home.html page. Let me to write here home.html page. This is the data. Okay, look at here. Let me to write here. This is HTTP header. Okay, and this is, and look at here, this is HTTP header, and after that HTTP data. Okay, because of that, actually the HTTP data means the web page or home.html encapsulated with the HTTP header and is returned to the HTTP client. Or maybe we need to advertise, we need to send more than one message, one reply, because the home.html has more content. Or it's okay, the web server can send the other for example packets, other message. This is the first message, and can send the other message to the for example the C1. But in the other message we don't need to use again the for example HTTP header, because all of these packets are residing on or are contents of the first web page. Because of that, in the next message that we are receiving from the HTTP server, we don't have any information about the HTTP header. This means that the HTTP header is same for all of these next packets. Look at here, I sent get home.html means I sent get message, one of the HTTP message, to the web server, and the web server first verifies its content, and it finds that it has this web page. Because of that, it sends me in the HTTP header OK code and some other information. After that, it starts to sending the content of the home.html to me, because the content of the home.html is more than one for example message. Because of that, here as you can see, we are receiving the next home.html content, but here we don't have the header. Maybe you ask me how the HTTP client can again gather all of this information. It's so easy, because you know that I will talk about this more than for example this video. But you know that here, after sending the HTTP message, okay, the transport layer should add one number to all of them. I will talk about that. Don't worry about this. But for now, we know that the function of the HTTP is sending a suitable message for about the our request to the destination, and this means that we are talking about with destination, and now HTTP of the destination, HTTP protocol of destination can send us some code about our request. After that, it can send the content that we want. This is the function of the application layer about the HTTP. You know that here we have HTTP GET request, and this is the HTTP reply. Let me write here. It's a good practice for knowing some of the information about the HTTP. HTTP, the first request is the GET request. Okay, this is the GET request, one of the famous messages of the GET request. You are using the GET request every day. Okay, and after that we receive the HTTP reply. Let me write here reply. This is the HTTP reply, contain one header and contain the for example data. Okay, after that, as you can see here, we have one interesting fact, and that interesting fact is that the HTTP of source now is talking with the HTTP of the destination. This is the same layer interaction, means the application layer of the C1 now is talking with the application layer of the web server. If you are using FTP, again we have the same function. If you are using another protocols, for example SMTP, again we have the same for example condition. Okay, because of that, for all of the protocols, we have the same layer interaction in TCP-IP. Let me write here. This is one of the facts of the TCP-IP. Same, okay, layer interaction. Look at here. Until now, we learned about the application layer a little more than previous video. Okay. Step by step, we will learn more than this. Finally, you have a bunch of information about the TCP/IP, and you can sense that you better understand the detail of the TCP/IP. Before talking about the transport layer, let me to give you one important notation, because maybe you encounter with this notation. Look at here. I wrote www.example.com. You know that the full version of the most web browsers, also called URL, contain the letter HTTP. Let me write here. When you are using your web browser, actually you are writing HTTP : okay, // then www.example.com. This is the default. This means that we are using the HTTP, you know it. And in this form of presentation is the URL. Let me write here. What is the URL? URL is the abbreviation of the Uniform Resource Locators. Uniform Resource Locators. Okay, maybe you see another abbreviation. Let me write here URI. Okay, URI is the abbreviation of the, again, universal, okay, universal, then resource identifier. Both of them are same. URL is abbreviation of the Uniform Resource Locators, and URI is the abbreviation of the Universal Resource Identifier. We can say this is a URL or this is a URI. And here I wrote HTTP, HTTPS, Telnet, SSH, FTP, SMTP, and we have many other applications, DNS, DHCP, or some other applications. This is a brief overview about the application layer, and you know that the HTTP transfers the data by sending multiple messages. Each of them is a message with a part of file, rather than wasting space by repeated HTTP headers. Because if you repeat the HTTP headers, you are wasting the, for example, bandwidth or some other resources. And this additional message simply omit the header. Okay, you know it. Okay, now let me to talk a little more about the transport layer. We will talk about the application layer again again in future videos, but for now it's sufficient. We learned in this part about the function of HTTP a little more, one of the applications, and after that we learned about the same layer interaction, and after that we learned about some of the terminology. Now we can start to talk about transport layer a little more than previous video. Okay, let me to talk about the function of the transport layer. You know that in TCP-IP, in each layer, we have many protocols, but in transport layer, we have a little less than protocol. In transport layer, the most famous protocols in TCP-IP are TCP and UDP. Okay, some of the applications are for example, in the applications in the application layer are using the TCP as the transport layer about their function, and some other are using the UDP. For example, HTTP uses TCP, HTTPS uses TCP, Telnet and SSH use TCP, FTP use TCP, SMTP use TCP, DNS and DHCP, for example, use UDP. Okay, and this is the choice of the designer of that protocols about the function of that protocols. In this video, I'm not going to talk about this, but let me to talk about only the TCP because you know that the HTTP is working with a TCP. Because of that, we can talk about the TCP. And let me to say that in this layer, in transport layer, we have many functions, and we will learn some of this function in the future videos. But in this video, only I'm going to talk about one of the famous functions of this, for example, a layer, or maybe two of the functions, and the name of that famous function is the error recovery. Also, we will talk about the segmentation because in the previous video I mentioned it. Here, let me to say that I am going to talk about the error recovery, but with error recovery also I'm going to talk about the segmentation, okay, or segmentation. Also, when we are talking about the segmentation, actually we are talking about the acknowledgement. All of them, all of these three function of these layers are relevant to each other, but the main function that I'm going to talk about, that this is new for us in this video, is the error recovery. This is one of the function of transport layer. But don't forget, in transport layer we have many features. Because of that, don't think that all of the functions of the transport layer are limited to these three functions. No, we will talk about them, but for now let me to talk about the error recovery, segmentation, and also acknowledgement. You know that, assume that now we have one HTTP message, HTTP, for example, get the -home.htm from web client, web server to the web server. Okay, and also we have a message, we have some message from the web server to the web client. Let me to ask you one question. The first question is that when the content of the some of these messages are more than the capacity of one message, how we can segment that message? This is the function of transport layer, okay, with transport layer. Let me to ask you another question. Assume that the what happened if the